So we're at the bottom of Eruvin Mem Hamid Aleph. There are two Mishnayos toward the bottom. We're at the first of those two Mishnayos. Tonight we're going to be focusing a little bit on the mindset of Kinyan Shvisa. And that's how this Mishnah opens. Misha Yasha Baderech, a person is resting on the path. Ve'amad v'ra'a harehu samach le'ir. And he sees, when he kind of looks up, that he's actually pretty close to the city. He realizes that he's very close. So it says the Gemara, and it says the Mishnah in the name of Reb Meir, Hol v'lo haisa kavanasa bekach lo yikanes tivi Reb Meir. Reb Meir kind of gives him a little clap. He says, you didn't even know where you were. You're not allowed to enter the city. Afal pi that you're relatively close. Rabbi Yehuda Omer yikanes. Rabbi Yehuda says he's allowed to, and he brings a story to support his case. Says the Mishnah, last line of that Mishnah, Amar Rabbi Yehuda ma'isa haya v'nichnas Rabbi Tarfon below miskabe. Rabbi Tarfon got close enough; he didn't realize where he was, and when he, as we'll soon see the details of this case. But he was then allowed to enter into the city. So the Gemara opens with a brisa on that same story. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yehuda ma'isa Rabbi Tarfon she'mahalach b'derech. There was a story where Rabbi Tarfon was traveling, v'chash chalo, and it got dark where he was. V'lan chutz la'ir. And he slept outside of the city limits. L'shachris, when he woke up in the morning, mitza'uhu roe bakar, there were shepherds who found him, and amrulo, Rebbe, harei ha'ir lefanecha hikanes. And they said, Rebbe, you're close to the city, go in. Nichnas v'yashav b'beis hamedrash, v'dorash kol hayom kulo. So he walked in from where he was into the city, and he was dorish, he was a Rebbe, he taught Torah, no problem at all. This is a beautiful raya to the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah against Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir said you're not allowed to enter into the city. Says Rabbi Yehuda, yes you are, and I can prove it with Rabbi Tarfon. Says the Gemara says Amru Le. That's clearly an error because in the Mishnah it was Yachid v'Yachid. It was Rabbi Meir against Rabbi Yehuda. So the Girsa on the side changes this to Amar Le. Amar Le, Rabbi Meir says to Rabbi Yehuda, Misham Raya. That story from Rabbi Tarfon, that doesn't prove anything. Why not? Because Shema Belibo Haisa. Maybe he had perfect intentions to enter the city. And the fact that the shepherds woke him up in the morning, that doesn't mean he didn't have intentions. Maybe he perfectly planned to go in there, no problem. Not only that, but also maybe, says the Gemara, maybe, Beis HaMedrash, Muvla Besoch Tchumohaya. Maybe from wherever he was Kona Shvisa, is 2,000 amos, that Hitaka was able to get to the Beis Medrash because it was within 2,000 amos. Either way, the Gemara doesn't leave a conclusion between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. We will see later today about how we paskin between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. As a general rule, it will apply here as well. But there's a section in the back of, I think it's in Brachos, called Klalei HaTalmud, which is the rules of how you paskin from a Gemara. Rabbi Meir in place of Rabbi Yossi in place of Rabbi Shimon, and some of that Gemara is actually repeated in today's sugya. So we'll be discussing that. A little bit later. End of Mishnah and Gemara number 1. Mishnah 2, 5 lines from the bottom. Daf Mem Hamid Aleph. Let's continue. Mi sheyashin baderech. Below yada shecha shecha. Now this is a little different. This isn't a person who is kind of just sitting back and relaxing. Here we have a person who is mamish sleeping. Now we know from the world of choshen mishpat, adam muad la'olam, that if a person kicks something in their sleep and they break it, so then halacha is that they're chayiv for any damages that they cause. They're considered a mazik, and they have to pay for the damages that they've caused. So how does that apply to the world of being kona shvisa? Can a person who's sleeping be kona shvisa? So it says the Mishnah, you have a person who's sleeping. He's sleeping from before Shkia to past Shkia. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, we're going to be spending much of the day, the whole next Amud pretty much, is about Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri and his Shita. We're going to try to understand it. We'll also analyze his counterpart, which is this Shita right here. If you're sleeping, that doesn't count at all. So if this is true, then this would be a contrast point to the world of Choshen Mishpat, where we see that there's accountability even when you're sleeping. But here, it seems to be that the Rabbanan say that there's no Kinyan Shvisa when you're sleeping. So that means that the Chachamim would be separating themselves from the world of Choshen Mishpat as it relates to sleep. And here is the very, very well-known machlokes about how many amos do you get when you're Kona Dalet amos? Do you get 4 in total, 4 in diameter, or do you get 8 in diameter? So here's the machlokes right here. These 4 amos that the Chachamim say that you only get 4 in the case of the person sleeping, Rabbi Lazar Omer, v'hu be'emtza'an. That's you being in the middle of the 4 amos. Masha'en kein Rabbi Yehuda Omer le'ezer ruach she'yirtzeh yelech. He can go in any direction he wants. However, and this is not natural to our understanding of this machlokes, umo de Rabbi Yehuda she'im birer lo she'eno yachal lachzor. Rabbi Yehuda agrees that once he picks a direction, I want my Dalet Amos to be east, then he only has a total of 4. That he agrees to. It's just that you are given, says Rabbi Yehuda, that initial choice to choose which direction you want your 4 amos to be in. Last line of Daf Mem Hey Amud Aleph says the Mishnah. The Mishnah continues, Hayushnayim. What if there were 2 people who were kind of camping together outside? Each of them only had Dalet Amos. Mixas Amosav Shelzeh B'soch Amosav Shelzeh. And like we spoke about yesterday, there's kind of this overlapping Venn diagram of sorts where let's say my tchum and Michael's sitting closest, and my tchum and Michael's tchum overlap. How do they overlap? So Rashi details this for us. Take a look at Rashi, Dibur Hamaskal Hayushnaim, the very last line, 2 people. Here's the distance. Omdim zeh rachok mizeh vav amos. We're standing 6 amos apart. Dimivla'an beis amos shel kol echad besoch shel chavero. So if I have 4 and you have 4 and we're standing 6 feet apart, that means that there's 6 amos between us. The first 2 are mine but not yours. Your first 2 are yours but not mine. But the 2 in the middle are overlapping. They're muvla tchum b'toch tchum. So that's what's happening here in the Mishnah. Back inside, the Mishnah writes, Hayushnaim, mixas amosav shelzeh b'soch zev, amosav b'soch amosav shelzeh. So we overlap with the center, 2 amos in the middle of the 6 amos between us. They overlap. Mevi'in ve'ochlin be'emtza. We are allowed to eat in that overlapping space. That's not a problem. Top of Mem Hamid Beis Bilvad. However, shelo yotzi zeh mitoch shelo b'toch shel chaver. You should probably at least conceptually draw a line in the sand, because I'm not allowed to go into the final 2 amos. Again, there's 6 amos between us. First 2 are mine, middle 2 are shared, last 2 are yours. So I have my 4. I can use my 4 in your direction, but I can't go into your 2 amos at the end there. So that's what the Mishnah says. What if there's 3 people, Hayushlosha, and this doesn't assume the Venn diagram of 3 that looks like a triangle. This assumes side by side. Says the Mishnah as follows. Hayushlosha v'hemtzai muvla beinehen. There's 3 people, and the middle one is somewhat swallowed by the 2 people around him. So then, hu mutar imahem, the person in the middle can engage both people to his right and to his left. V'hein mutar imo. They as well can engage with him in the overlapping spaces. V'shnaim hachitzonim asurim zein zeh. However, the person all the way to the right and all the way to the left, the 2 of them are not allowed to be in the same space as one another, because that would then mean that you left your Dalet Amos. Amar Reb Shimon lemaha davar domeh. What is this case comparable to? This case of 3, says the Gemara, it's comparable to the following. L'shalosh chatzeros apsuchos zulazu. You have 3 chatzeros, one next to the other, right, middle, left. Upsuchos the Rishus Harabim, and they're as well open to Rishus Harabim. Irvu shtayim im ha'imtzayis. If the 2 outer ones make an eruv with the inner one, he muteres imahem vehein muteres ima. They can go inside and outside of their chatzeros. However, ushtaim hachitzonos asuros zo imzo. So that's what the Gemara gives as a comparison to our case. Again, we're talking about overlapping tchumen. So again, if there's 3 of us, right, middle, and left, so we're only allowed to share in the middle, but room number 1 cannot share with room number 3. That would not be allowed. Opens the Gemara in analysis of the sheets of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So I'm just going to flip back and read Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's case again. If a person's sleeping and they did not know that it became dark, they get 2,000 amos. Namely, in learning world, this person was kona shvisa while they were sleeping. So let's say it a little bit more. A yashen can be kona shvisa. How do you do that when you're sleeping? That's unbelievable. Do you need to have das in the moment? Is it conceptual das? Is it a halachic assumption? What's the mechanism here? So we're going to start analyzing a little bit this machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri and the Rabbanan, because of course the Rabbanan in that case of a person who's yashin said that you only get Dalet Amos. So let's see what the Gemara says. Opens up at the Gemara, 10 lines down, Mem Hamid Beis, says the Gemara, Boy Rava, my kasava Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. What is the svara to say that a person who is sleeping is able to be konish visa? How does that work? What's the mechanism? Says the Gemara, one of 2 possibilities. Mizbar Kosavar, could it be that he holds that, and we've seen this principle before, we'll discuss it in more detail now, Cheftze Hefker, Konin Shvisa, things that are Hefker, if you have an object that's Hefker, it can be Kona Shvisa. The Gemara is equating this to someone who's sleeping. You're considered similar to Hefker. Ubedinhu deliflog bekalim. Typically speaking, it's true that Cheftze Hefker does speak about kalim. However, but here, when we are arguing about a person, the reason why we apply a Cheftze Hefker Konan Shvisa to a person, that a person can be Konan Shvisa while they're sleeping, is to teach us the power, the chumrah of the Rabbanan. What's the power of their shita? Because according to the Rabbanan, we could have argued, it would have been reasonable to argue that since had he been awake, kind of like it's kind of like the way we use Hoel in other places, right? Hoel is a halachic principle. It doesn't just mean since. Hoel, because he could have done it while he was awake. So the fact that he's sleeping now doesn't detract from what he's doing. Says the Gemara, Kamash Malandilo, the Rabbanan would argue and say, no, that he is not Kona here. Not because the Rabbanan would argue anyways on the principle of Cheftzei Hefker Konan Shvisa. Odilma, or perhaps, no, maybe Kasavar of Yochanan, the reason why this person who's sleeping is Kona Shvisa, it's not because of Cheftzei Hefker Konan Shvisa. He would say, Be'alma Cheftzei Hefker Ein Konan Shvisa. V'achayinu Taima, here the reason why is because Hoel V'nei or Kana, Yashenami Kana. Maybe he could have argued that Hoel does work here. So in the first version, we're saying the machlokas between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is whether or not we apply the principle of Cheftzei Hefker Konan Shvisa. And according to the second version, the question is, do we employ the principles of Hoel? So which one is it? What is the mechanism of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri? Is it Cheftzei Hefker Konan Shvisa, that this conceptual idea that things that are hefker, that they're able to make a kinyan shvisa, and again, we equate this hefker to someone who's sleeping, or no, is the reason why Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri lenient to give 2,000 amos because of Hoel, that since you could have, had you been awake, you would have been kona 2,000 amos, therefore, even though you're sleeping, we allow. That's the Gemara's question, a lamdusha question. So answers the Gemara 1/3 of the way down, Memhamid base, says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yosef Tashma. Let's see if we can prove it from here. Gishamim sheyardu me erev Yom Tov. Let's say that it rains on erev Yom Tov and there's a collection of water. Yesh lahen alpain amelachol ruach. What do we see? This is falling from the heavens. It's rain. It collects. That's hefker, right? We see that there's hefker, and we see that the rain that's hefker is kona shvisa. It has alpain amelachol ruach. Ah, beautiful idea. So we see now that hefker, that cheftzei hefker is kona shvisa. So maybe this is the proof that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is of the opinion of the first line of reasoning, that the reason he holds about alpain mama is because of cheftzei hefker kona shvisa, and not because of Hoel. And we're going to inanimate objects can be moved 2,000 amos because it was kona shvisa. Oh yeah. If let's say you were kona shvisa and then a rain bucket filled up on Erev Yontif, kona shvisa, no problem, you can carry it. That's the principle of cheftzei hefker kona shvisa. Even though it's inanimate, and as the Gemara hinted to above, it's really primarily about kalim. We applied it to a human who's sleeping because he's kind of hefkervelt a little bit, similar, right? It's inanimate at that point. So the rain is basically equivalent to that. It's an inanimate object and it's kona shvisa. So this is a beautiful proof. And let's just finish up the proof. We're going to learn the second half of this source. It's only one line and we'll analyze it later. And it says, B'yom tov, had it fallen on Yontiv, then harehen kiragle kol adam. We'll explain this term later, but in short, it's basically it basically only belongs to you as much as you want it to belong to you. There's no kinyan shvisa on Yontif. But what we see in the beginning of this brisa is that if it rains on Erev Yontif, that there's a kinyan shvisa. So it says the Gemara as follows: if you want to say that the reason why Rav Yochanan ben Nuri says that a person who's sleeping is kona shvisa is because hefker is because cheftzei hefker konan shvisa, then Hamani, who's the author of this opinion, that rain that falls on Erev Yontif is kona shvisa, perfect. Rav Yochanan here, it's Rav Yochanan ben Nuri. That's perfect. However, if you say halfway down Memhamid base, if you say Eloi amres cheftzei hefker ein konan shvisa, but then if you say that this brisa, which says that when rain falls on Erev Yontif and is kona shvisa, if you say that it's not because of the mechanism of cheftzei hefker kona shvisa, then Hamani. This doesn't fit with the Rabbanan, lo Rabbi Yochanan v'lo Rabbanan. Then this doesn't fit within our Mishnah at all. Namely, we're stuck without an author. It's a little bit interesting. The Gemara is bothered by that because so what? Maybe there's a third sheet in the Tanai. Says the Gemara, we're not going to have it. That is the argument to say that this is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and therefore, and we conclude this way, that really it's option number one. We spoke about two options of why there's a machlokas Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri and the Rabbanan. Option one was that they argued over cheftzei hefker konan shvisa. Can inanimate objects be kona shvisa? A sleeping person, a kli, water. Versus option two, is it based on Hoel? So now the Gemara is saying no, it's not based on Hoel. It's based on cheftzei hefker konan shvisa. And says the Gemara, Yossi Abai v'ka Amar la lahashmaisa. Abai was sitting and talking about this. Amar le Rav Safra le Abaye. I don't understand. Maybe the reason why Rav Yochanan ben Nuri, forget Rav Yochanan ben Nuri, maybe the reason why in that brisa we said that on Erev Yontif you can be kona shvisa is because of the following. The Dilma, big shamim asmuchim le'iraskinan. Maybe the rain was falling in the neighborhood, and I'm looking up to the sky. I look up, I'm like, that rain's mine. I'm being kona shvisa. It's not because it's hefker and chefse hefker kona shvisa. No, I had in mind to be kona shvisa on that. So maybe you can learn nothing from this. Says the Gemara, you cannot do that. Omar leilo sal kadaitach. We're going to see two possible answers to this. Here's answer number one. Here's the first reason why you're not allowed to say, not allowed, but that there's a better answer to this. We're not going to say that a person was establishing this rain as their own, and really it is based on the principle of chefze hefker kohen shvisa. Amar le lo sal kadaitach. You should not assume that it's because a person had in mind. Why? Ditznan. We have two conflicting sources. Here's source number one. Bor shel yachid kiragle yachid. If you have a pit that belongs to a person, then everything that's in that pit it's kiragle yachid. It's like the feet of that person. No kinyan shvisa. We'll translate these at another point. But for now, this means that there's no kinyan shvisa. Bishal osa ha'ir kiragle osa ha'ir. And if it belongs to the city, there too, there's no kinyan shvisa. People have to make the kinyan on their own. And now this is where we come in. Bishal ole bavel kiragle hamemale. When it comes to the ole bavel, there we treat the water only based on who fills it up. So if I fill it up, so wherever I'm standing, when I fill it up, my 2,000 amos are measured from there, but there's no kinyan shvisa. However, Vitanya, we have a conflicting brisa that goes against this. Bor shel shvatim, and the Gemara assumes that a bor shel shvatim is similar to the case of Ole Bavel. Says the Gemara, yesh lanu payin amal l'chol ruach kashana hadade. So the Mishnah that we learned about the Ole Bavel, where we said that it's not kona shvisa, and the brisa of the bor shel shvatim says that there is a kinyan shvisa, 2,000 amos. That's a stira. Elalav, it must be shma mina, that we're not going to use the answer of I picked the raindrops as they fell. That's not going to work. Ela shma mina, harav yochanan ben Nuri harabanan. The best way to answer this conflict is by indicating that each source in the Tanaim is by Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and the other is by the Rabbanan. The answer is a perfect answer. So therefore, sikum hadvarim, up until now, we hold, like the first possible machlokes option, that our Mishnah on the bottom of Mem Hey Amud Aleph, which speaks about why is it the case that a person who's sleeping can be kona shvisa according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, says the Gemara, that's because he holds of the opinion of chefze hefker or kona shvisa. Something that is inanimate is still able to be kona shvisa during chashecha, even if they're sleeping. That's a pretty remarkable idea when you think about it in halachic terms. The guy is sleeping. You're making a kinyan shvisa for all of Shabbos. You have no das at all. We don't care. The haraya, raindrops. The haraya kalim, we don't care. This isn't about your das. You don't need das, says Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. You don't need das to be kona shvisa. You just need to be in the right place at the right time. So that's what we're up to now. We're 2/3 of the way down. Memhamid Beis. Let's continue. Ki asa lekamed de Rav Yosef Omar le hachi kamar Rav Safra v'hachi ahadrile. He spoke about this the question that came up of Rav Safra about maybe the guy chose the raindrops and it wasn't because of chefse hefker kohen shvisa, and the rejection answer that we said about the conflict in the Mishnayos. Says the Gemara, Amar le, I don't understand. Why didn't he give a better answer? What would have been a better answer to this question? Says the Gemara as follows. Amar le, what would have been a better argument? If you want to argue that maybe that source that we were looking at is really the raindrop source where the rain falls on Erev Yontif, and we said that it was Kona Shvisa. Maybe that's not because of Chefse Hefker or Kona Shvisa. Maybe that's because it's Kshamim Hasmuchin Le'ira Skinan. Says the Gemara, that doesn't make sense. Because then, Hay Yeshlan Alpayim Amal L'chol Ruach, Hay Kiragle Anshe Oso Ha'ir Mibayale. Then the language of the Mishnah should have been a different language of the Mishnah. It doesn't make any sense. That's because you chose it. That's ragle anshe oso ha'ir. That's because you chose it. Then it shouldn't say alpayim amma because it's not automatic. It should only say alpayim amma in the brisa when the rain falls if it's automatic. If you're choosing that the rain becomes kona shvisa, then the language of alpayim amma is lav dafka. Then it depends on you. So the language would have been wrong. So that's how the Gemara gives a more clear answer here. And that brings us to the 2 dots, 10 lines or so from the bottom of them. Hey, Amud Beis. In that brisa where we saw that on Erev Yom Tov, if rain falls, you're Kona Shvisa, we also saw the following, and we're going to analyze it now. Amar Mar, the Yom Tov, what did we say in that brisa? That if the rain fell on Yom Tov, then Harehen Karagle Kol Adam. There we said it's not automatically Kona Shvisa, only if you're Kona Shvisa with it. But on its own, there's no automatic status of rain. Why not? Why wouldn't there be an automatic? Why is it that if rain falls on Friday, On Erev Yantif, we say automatic Kona Shvisa, but if it falls on Yantif, then it wouldn't work. The Amai, says the Gemara, a crazy idea. Likne Shvisa be'okainus. It should be that you were Kona Shvisa by the oceans. Why? Because the rain was there all the time. And what are we assuming? The ecosystem of water. Water in the ocean evaporates into clouds. The cloud moves over and it comes down. So when it was in the cloud, whatever, but it was in the ocean. At some point, it should have been Kona Shvisa. So why would you say that rain that falls on Yantiv doesn't work? It was Kona Shvisa 2 days ago when it was not yet evaporated from the ocean. So says the Gemara, Lema, maybe we should say, by virtue of the fact that we don't say this, right? By virtue of the fact that we say that when rain falls on Yantiv, that there's no Kinyan Shvisa, so maybe we should say, Lema de lo Rabbi Eliezer. What does Rabbi Eliezer hold? Rabbi Eliezer, he says that whenever anybody is using any water, it all comes from the ocean, one way or another, it all comes from the ocean. 2/3 of the world is covered by water. So any water that we have access to is from an evaporation system, right? It just brings up water from the ocean, moves it onto the land, and then drops water on you. The system continues and continues. But all the water comes from the ocean. It must be that we don't hold like Rabbi Eliezer, because what do we see? We see that on Yantiv that there's no Kinyan Shvisa if the rain falls. Says the Gemara, no. We're talking about clouds that niskashu, they formed before Yantiv started. This water was not in the ocean at that time. And we're looking at these specific ones. Says the Gemara, how do you do that? The Dilma Hanach Azle Hanach Achrini Ninu. What are you, a cloud master? You know which clouds you're looking at. They change their shapes by the second. Says the Gemara, actually, you're a cloud master. You are able to tell. There's a particular shape, or you're a bucky, whatever it is. You know which cloud it is, and that's why it says that you're not going to be Kona Shvisa here. Or another possibility, have a suffix to Divreihem, the suffix to Divreihem Lahakiel. And maybe here we would trust your judgment on that because it's only a suffix derabbanan. Says Gemara, still, I don't understand. The liknei shvisa be'avin. Even if it's not going to be the Kona Shvisa, the water in the ocean, but once it's up in the cloud that you know about, why isn't it Kona Shvisa when it's up there? Why does it have to be on the ground? This showed me, no, shouldn't we learn from here? Beautiful, says the Gemara. Great question. We learned about this sugya. What about Tchumen L'Malam Yud? We said walking on top of pegs and floating. Remember we said with the Shem, Machlokas Rashi Rambam, are you floating or are you standing on top of some type of pedestal system? So either way, the Gemara says, beautiful proof from here that there's no Tchumen above 10, because we see that even had there been a cloud above your head from before Shkia, we don't care. No Kinyan Shvisa. So says the Gemara as follows. Says the Gemara, no. Let me just finish the question. Sorry. If the yesh tchumen, that had it been that there was tchumen above 10, then liknei shvisa be'avim. Then maybe the clouds should have been kona shvisa. Says the Gemara, la'olam. No, I wouldn't go quite that far with the argument. La'olam eimalach the yesh tchumen. I really could argue that there is tchum Shabbos above 10 tfachim. Umaya. The reason over here why it doesn't apply, even though normally we might have argued that there is a kinyan, that there is tchumen above 10 tfachim, but here the problem is umaya. Be'eva in the cloud, nivla bliying. It's not really water. It's in an evaporated steam form, right? But it's not droplets. The droplets don't just sit there in the cloud floating, waiting to fall. That would be against the rules of gravity. So however the water droplets are there, a very condensed form of liquid, of liquefied, of whatever the word is, of steam. It's not really steam, it's not hot. But the non-droplets, it's not yet rain. It's not yet rain. It says Gemara, if it's not yet rain, you have another problem. Top of Memvav Madalef, if it's not yet rain, then Kol Shekain, you have another issue. Tahavaluhu nola de'asire. Forget about Kinyan Shvisa. When it falls, how can you drink it? It's muksa. It's nolad. If what you're saying is that when the water's in the clouds, it's not water, so then when it falls, it's nolad. That's mamish beis hashanol d'miyamtim. Says the Gemara, Ella, no. It's not that it's not water. It is water. Ella maya be'avim, when water's in the clouds, made not naide. It's not sitting still. It's not sitting still. And you can't have a kinyan shvisa when things are not sitting still. And the Gemara extends this as well. You also can't ask a question from the ocean about why there was no kinyan shvisa in the ocean, because water never stays still in the ocean. Here too, Mayabu kainos nami made not naide. And in fact, there's a brisa that supports this idea that when there's liquid that's moving, that you are not allowed to have a kinyan shvisa. But Tanya, the Brisa writes, Naros hamoshchun u'mayanos hanovin. If you have water that's flowing, if you have springs that are flowing, harehen kiragle kol adam, it is as if it is something that is not kona shvisa. And this is the language of the Gemara, ragle kol adam. We've seen it a few times, which references something that falls but is not kona shvisa unless you are mamish kona shvisa on your own. And that's where the Gemara brings us up to with our machlokes, a little bit of a sidebar machlokes about that. This last sugya is really disconnected from our case, the sugya about rain falling on Yontif. But we did learn here a very critical principle, that you can't really be kona shvisa with water when it's moving. How far do we take this? We know that the particles of liquids, by definition, when we know the science of a solid. The science of a solid, let's just talk about ice. Ice builds a lattice, it locks itself, and yes, the particles are moving in a minor way, scientifically speaking, but they're not really moving. But water, everything's so fluid. Can you be kona shvisa with water in a glass mixed with salt? We'll go back to our Gemara that we saw, mayim u'melach, if it's all mixed up. Really? But it's moving. May not naide. So how is that allowed? It's okay. Got to figure out in the Rishonim how all of this works out. Sikum advarim. So far, we've learned Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri held that the reason why you get alpayim amma when you're sleeping, why you can be kona shvisa when you're sleeping, is because we hold chefze hefker is kona shvisa. This brings us to the Gemara's desire to give a psak. 5 lines down in Vav Meral says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yaakov bar Idi Amar Reb Yoshua ben Levi. This is statement number 1 of Reb Yoshua ben Levi. What does he say? Halacha Rav Yochanan ben Nuri we paskin lekula, that a person who's sleeping is able to be kona shvisa 2,000 amos from wherever they are. Says the Gemara, Amar le Reb Zera, the Reb Yaakov bar Idi. He says, wait a minute. Were you in Shir when this happened? Did you hear Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi say this explicitly? Beferush shmi'alach or mechlala shmi'alach? Which one was it? Did you hear him say the words we paskin like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, or mechlala? Did you make a diuk on your own? So says the Gemara. He answers, "I'm like beferush shmi'ali." I heard it directly. What were you asking, my klala? What psak were you thinking about when you asked me if I heard it explicitly or if I implied it? So he said back to him, to Amar, because we know Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi has a second din. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi has another rule by Eruvin. What's his rule? A very important rule, difficult to apply, but important to know. The Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, halacha kedivrei hamekel be'eruv. Oh, this is a very, this idea is brought up a lot throughout the halachos of Eruv. It's just, again, very difficult to apply. So we're going to learn a little bit about this tonight. So it says the Gemara, v'tarte lamali. Why? This is really what Reb Zera was pushing at, is that I heard 2 statements from Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. One is the one that you just told me, that we passing like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and the second one, which is the one I thought that maybe you inferred from, he said to Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, I thought you had inferred from the din of Kedivrei HaMekel Be'eruv, and because of Kedivrei HaMekel Be'eruv, so in our Mishnah, you said that a person who's yashen, who's sleeping, gets 2,000 amos. So it says the Gemara, I don't understand, but Tarse Lamali, why would I need both? Amar Reb Zera, I'll answer why you need both. Tzricha, we need both for the following reason. Now the Gemara is going to present 3 different answers as to this tzrichusa, as to why it is that we need these 2 sources of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Source number 1, that we pass like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and source number 2, that halacha kedivrei hamekel be'eruv. We're going to see 1 now, and the next 2 on the top of the next page, and then we're going to take a little side sugya here before we get to answer number 2. But here's answer number 1. Amar Reb Zera tzriche. I need both of them. We're about 10, 12 lines down. Says the Gemara, why do I need both of them? Because if you just tell me the line in the name of your Rebbe that halacha is Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, havamina bein lekula bein lechumra. I might have thought that we pass like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri in all cases bein lekula bein lechumra. Rashi here gives an example. Take a look at Rashi to the right, about 2-3 inches above where we are. Dibur hamaschal lechumra kegon kli hefker yamris konen shvisa. If you say that there's a kinyan shvisa, then aser leholichan lemakom sheirev zehamotzan ela alpaim hudi islahu lechol ruach. You're limited. It can't go back to its home. It only has a limited scope. So there might be a chumrah that's built in, that's kind of wired in here. So I might have thought that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is bein lekula bein lechumra. Kamash malan halacha kedivrei hamekel be'eruv. So I needed this second statement of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi to qualify the first. So here's how it would work according to this approach. We pass like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Across the boards, always, everywhere, even the chumrah? No. That's why we have the second statement of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, that halacha kedivrei hamekel be'eruv, so that we don't overdo it. Says the Gemara, okay, why didn't we just give the second din? If what you're concerned about is that I might have thought Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri was going to be machmir, just give me the kula, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, just forget that the halacha is simply that halacha kedivrei mekel be'eruv, and leave out the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, halacha Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri lamali. It says the Gemara, Yitzrich, that we also need. Sal kadai techamina hani mili. This is what the Gemara says, hani mili, what might I have thought? I might have thought that when do we say that halacha is kedivrei hamekel be'eruv, that's only hanimili yachid b'makom yachid v'rabim b'makom rabim. That's when the machlokes has equal opponents, 1 person versus 1, or many versus many. However, avon yachid b'makom rabim emalo, I might have thought that had it been Yachid v'Rabim, which is our Mishnah is Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri against the Rabbanan. So maybe I would have thought that in our Mishnah, no, you can't say halacha k'divrei mekel be'eruv because it's Yachid v'Rabim. That's why we have the first line of halachas Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So this is how the Gemara explains both sides. But the Gemara is very bothered by this idea. What's the havamina that Yachid v'Rabim halacha k'Rabim, that we wouldn't apply halacha k'divrei mekel be'eruv in this world? Amar le Rava le Abaye, almost halfway down, a little bit more than a third of the way down. Mevav Meral says the Gemara. Amar le Abaye, Amar le Rava le Abaye michti. Let's see. Eruvin derabanan. Eruvin is we know it's derabanan almost always. Mali Yachid b'makom Yachid umali Yachid b'makom Rabim. I don't understand. Is it Yachid b'makom Yachid or is it Yachid b'makom Rabim? Amar le Rav Papa. Rav Papa says to Rava, I don't understand. Are you saying that there's no distinction of Yachid v'Rabim halacha k'Rabim by dinei derabanan? Uvid derabanan lo shanilan bein Yachid b'makom Yachid liyachid b'makom Rabim? Really? Yachid v'Rabim halacha k'Rabim only applies by dinei d'oraisa? It's a famous song, right? This is like across Shas. This is a huge shaila. Are you saying that Yachid v'Rabim halacha k'Rabim only applies by dinei d'oraisa? But by dinei derabanan, we don't pass it. We would not use the guidelines of Yachid v'Rabim halacha k'Rabim. Wild. Says Gemara, you can't say that. V'atanan, I'll give you a proof. I'll show you a case where we have a din derabanan, one that we learned in Maseches Nida many months ago, a year ago. One that we're going to revisit now. V'atanan, we're going to see over here a case where we have halacha Yachid v'Rabim halacha k'Rabim that plays out with a din derabanan. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Kol isha she'avur aleh shalosh onos daya shaita. We were speaking there about whether or not a woman who has poreses nida, a woman who reaches her menstrual cycle, and she's in the middle of being osekes b'taharos. She's working with taharos, and she gets her machzor, she gets her period. So do we have to look backwards in time to be concerned that she actually had dam before, and she was mitami the taharos that she worked on for the last day, month, week? Like, what are we talking about? How far do we go back? So there in the first Mishnah Maseches Nida, there's a three-way machlokas in the Tanoim. But, says Rabbi Eliezer, if a woman is avra la shalosh onos, if she has her machzor, her period, the same time, 3 times in a row, it's a vestes kavua, then we would say daya shaita. Daya shaita means that the minute that she notices that she was poreses nida, then from there and forward, we should be concerned. We're not retroactive with the blood that we see, and all the taharos that she was osekes with prior to that point are totally fine. Vitanya, and the Brisa says later, a Brisa that is basically in line with this Mishnah says as follows. Maisa, there was a story. The Asa Rebbe Rabbi Elazar. There was a story where Rebbe held like the lenient opinion of Daya Shait of Rabbi Elazar. La'achar shenizkar, and after he remembered, what did he remember? We don't know yet. La'achar shenizkar Omar, he said, Kidaihu Rabbi Eliezer lismoch alav b'shas adchak. So the Brisa says that, in this case where Rabbi Eliezer said that if a woman got her period the same exact time, every single time, 3 months in a row, she has a vestes kavua, we can say daya shaita, that we only are concerned about the blood that we see from this moment and onwards, but we don't retroactively say that we're not matame taharos retroactively, she's fine. All the taharos prior to that time are fine. Says Gemara, Maila achar shenizkar. What did Rebbe remember that he said this line that we can be somech on Rebbe Elazar when we need to? If what Rebbe remembered was that the din is not like Rabbi Eliezer, so then Rabbi Elazar, then b'shas adchak hechi avi kavase. He couldn't have remembered that the halacha isn't like Rabbi Elazar. Rather, ela de lo itmar hilchasa lo ki Rebbe Elazar, but lo ki Rabbanan. Rather, he said, I just don't know what the din is. I don't know how we paskin. Once he remembered the din of Yachid v'Rabim halacha k'Rabim, Omar Kedahi Rebbe Elazar lismoch alav b'shas adchak. What do we see from this case? We see that there's Yachid v'Rabim in a case of a din d'Rabbanan. Midoraisa, everything retroactively, all the taros that she was osekes with prior to her noticing that she had dam nida. Really, midoraisa, they're all fine. This whole discussion is midorabanan. What do we see? Yachid v'Rabim halacha k'Rabim. So Rava, your havamina, that Yachid v'Rabim halacha k'Rabim only applies by dinei d'oraisa, no possibility. And the Gemara leaves it as a question. We don't even answer it. Not only that, we have another one. Amar Rav Misharshia le Rava. I have a question for you too. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak le Rava. We're not sure if it was Rav Masharshi or Rav Nachman or Rav Yitzchak, but they asked Rabbi the following. Ubid the Rabbanan, the same question that we saw above that Rav Papa asked. Ubid the Rabbanan lo shani ben yachid b'makom yachid ben yachid b'makom rabin. You think that with Dinei de Rabbanan that we don't have yachid v'rabim malacha karabim? What are you talking about? By the world of Avelus, we have this principle. Gatanya, the Brisa writes, Shmua Krova, if a person hears Rahman al-Litzlan, that a family member passes away, and they hear about it in a time frame that's called Krova, within a short time frame of the death, we'll see what that is, then, and Baruch Hashem, in our world, we rarely hear about deaths that are beyond immediate. But when it's Krova, then Noheges Shiva Ushloshim, then a person keeps the customs of Shiva Ushloshim. Keyword is Noheges. Big discussion in the Meforshim. Is there mamish a chiyuv to keep Shiva and to keep Shloshim? So the Dina, the Rishonim argue whether or not Shiva is Deoraisa. So some of the Rishonim hold that if the Misa and the Kvura is the same day, then Avelus day one is Deoraisa. But other than that, all of Avelus is Derabanan / Minhag maybe. Okay, so says the Gemara, 15 lines from the bottom. Tanya, the Brisa writes, Shmua Krova, if you hear that a person dies within short time from of them dying, then the family members are Noheges Shiva Ushloshim. Rechoka, if you hear a long time after they died, then Noheges, Eina Noheges El Yomechid, you're only going to keep one day. So asks the Gemara, this is all part of the Brisa, Ve'ezu hi Krova ve'ezu Rechoka. What is hearing about a death that's soon after the death, and what is hearing about a death that's far after the death? So answers the Gemara, B'soch Shloshim Krova. Within 30 days is Krova, then you would have Shiva Ushloshim. And La'achar Shloshim, if it's after 30 days, Rechoka, Divi Rabbi Akiva. That's what is Rechoka. The Chachamim Omrim, no. Achas Shmua Krova, Ve'achas Shmua Rechoka, I don't care when you hear about it. It could be 10 years later. It doesn't make a difference. Say the Chachamim, Noheges Shiva Ushloshim. Now on that, here's what the Amoraim have to say. That Brisa teaches us about Shmua Rechoka and Shmua Krova. Rabbi Barachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Makom she'atamotzi yachid mekel v'rabim machmirin, halacha k'divrei hamachmirin hamerubin. In general, says Rabbi Barachana, in this regard, as it relates to Avelus, when we see yachid v'rabim, we follow the rabbim. Halacha k'divrei hamachmirin hamerubin. Chutz mizu, except for Avelus. Why? She'afal pish Rabbi Akiva mekel v'chachamim machmirin, halacha k'divrei Rabbi Akiva. So we see that in the world of Avelus, that the halacha is Kedibri HaMekel Ba'avel, just like we had halachas Kedibri HaMekel Be'eruv. Now, what the Gemara is teaching here is, that's not really a teach, it's pretty explicit. We see that in the world of Avelus, that really the rule should be Yachid V'Rabim Halacha Kirabim. It's all Dinei Derabanan. All of Avelus is Dinei Derabanan with that maybe exception of day one, if the Misa and Kvura is all done in the same day. In America, that doesn't happen. You don't have a burial the same day of the Misa. It just doesn't. In Eretz Yisrael, they pull it off all the time. Here in America, that does not happen. Kimat, I don't think it's ever happened. That's not a thing, right?
I think it started a little fast.
Really? Same day? I've never heard of that.
It's tough to do.
It's very difficult. You have to die at the right time. Saying if for Shkia, it's not. That's not pasha. Either way, it's very uncommon. So the Gemara here is highlighting that what did we say by Avelus? The Rabbi Bar Barchana said it really should be Yachid. Okay, but here we hold like Rabbi Akiva, we hold like Shmuel, who says what? That the halacha is Kidvei Mekel Ba'avel. So therefore, we see yet another example that Yachid V'Rabim Halacha Karabim applies by Dinei Derabanan, and we reject Rabba. Says the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom, Be'avelus hu de'akilu barabanan. However, aval be'alma afilu b'derabanan, even had it been a regular din derabanan, shani bein Yachid b'makom Yachid, bein Yachid l'makom Rabim. Very clear. The Gemara concludes that we do use the principles of Yachid V'Rabim Halacha Karabim, of course by Dinei Deoraisa, but even by Dinei Derabanan. Very conclusive. Now, all of this was just these last 30 lines, last 2/3 of this page were just a sidebar conversation, because remember what we were doing, 2 statements of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. One is that the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and the second is halacha k'divrei hamekel be'eruv. So we learned answer 1 and just did this side sugya. On the top of Memvav Medbeis is answer number 2. Namely, why do we need both of these sources of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi? Says the Gemara. Rav Papa Amar Itzrich Rashi Ula'el Koi Ad Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Itzrich Leilamemar Halacha Rabbi Yochanan Be'afal Gav Damar Halacha K'divrei Mekel Be'eruv. Why both Mar Mekomos? Says the Gemara Itzrich. Why do I need both sources of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi? Salka Daita Chamina Hani Mili. This that we say that halacha is K'divrei HaMekel Be'eruv is only by Eruvei Chatzeros about Eruvei Tchumenei Malo. I might have thought that halacha K'divrei HaMekel is only by Eruvei Chatzeros, which is a much more kal halacha. But where you're being kona shvisa for Shabbos, it's a more grand and difficult halacha. I'll just add, it's also, according to some Rishonim, a din d'oraisa, tchum could be d'oraisa. There we'd say about beruve tchumen emalo. I might have thought we do not apply the rule of halacha k'divrei mekel be'eruv by eruve tchumen kamash malan tzricha. It doesn't say kamash malan tzricha. Therefore, we need it. So it says the Gemara, you're distinguishing between eruve chatzeros and eruve tchumen. How do you know how to do that? Uminat timra deshanilan ben eruve chatzeros eruve tchumen. How do you know you can distinguish between the two? So it says the Gemara, it's not because I have a Mishnah that made this distinction. Amar Rabbi Yehuda b'med dvarim amurim. Of course, we're in the middle of another Mishnah here. We don't even know what's going on. Thanks again to Rashi. Fifth line, Rashi says, b'med dvarim amurim. How do we know de'ein ma'arvin lo la'adam elo l'daito shenisratze? If I was being analytical in Rashi, I'd have to ask, why does he need daito and nisratze? It's not just that he has to know about it, but he has to have a ratzon to want it. It's both. He has to know about it, but what if he doesn't want it? So that doesn't count. That's a gentle diuk in Rashi. But the point here in the Gemara is b'med dvarim amurim. When do we say that you can be kona shvisa when you can be kona, you can make a mechitza for other people, an eruv for other people? That's only be'eruv tchumen. Aval be'eruv chatzeros. Sorry. When do we say? What does Rashi say here? De'ein ma'arvin lo la'adam elo l'daiso shenisratze. You have to make sure that people know about your eruv tchumen, because if I'm kona shvisa for you here, but you really prefer to be in another location, I have not done any good by you. I did bad by you. However, aval eruv chatzeros me'arvin bein l'das uvein shelo l'das. If you're my neighbor, eruv chatzeros, then I'm going to be kona eruv chatzeros for you even without you knowing. Why? First time in Shas, I believe that we've seen this so far. Shezachin la'adam shelo b'fanav ve'im chavin la'adam ela b'fanav. Is this the first time in Shas? I think it's the first time in Shas we've seen this principle so far, because all I'm doing is making your life easier. If I help you with eruv chatzeros, now you can carry throughout your chatzer. You should be thanking me. That's zachin l'adam shelo b'fanav. But by a tchum, that's ein chavin l'adam ela b'fanav. That's not right. That I'm not allowed to ruin your tchum. So therefore, shows the Gemara here an example where we see a distinction between eruv chatzeros and eruv tchumen, and that was the havamin of the tzrichusa. But again, we have answer number 2 of Rav Papa. Rav Ashi Amar Itzrich. Here's answer number 3 as to why. Again, I'll just say the question again. Why do we have source number 1 that the halachas are Rabbi Yochanan Menuri, and why do we have source number 2 that says halacha k'divrei hamekel be'eruv? Says the Gemara, Rav Ashi Amar, 8 lines down, then vav amud beis. Itzrich, we need it. Salkadai techamina. What might I have thought? Hani mili b'shiurei eruv. About b'tchilas eruvim alo. And that would have been a problem. What is this talking about? How much food is left over? The Meforshim point out here, you have an eruv that you're using for multiple weeks. There's no problem with that. You can use the same eruv for many weeks in a row. So havamina, what might I have thought that we would say that halachas k'divrei hamekel be'eruv hani mili b'shiurei eruv ava b'tchilas eruv emalo. I might have thought that the leniencies would not have that you would have the different rules for shiurei eruv than you would have for tchilas eruv emalo, and therefore we need both of those opinions. We need the opinion to say the halacha like Rav Yochanan ben Nuri, and we also need halacha k'divrei hamekel be'eruv, so that in the subsequent weeks, week 1 you need to have a good eruv. You have to have mazon shtei sudos. But in subsequent weeks, even if small amounts are missing, it's shrunk, a little bit got eaten, the halacha is that it's still fine. How do you know you can make a distinction between the eruv as it was in the beginning, two sudos, shtei mazonos, shtei mazon, shtei sudos mazon, mazon shtei sudos, between that and tchilas eruv, between the shiurei eruv, what's left in subsequent weeks, which is less than mazon shtei sudos, and week 1. Says the Gemara, I know to make this distinction because of a different Mishnah. That's not in the Mishnah writes. Amar Rabbi Yossi says, B'med dvarim amurim. What is this B'med dvarim amurim mean? Rashi, just to our left, right above us, a line up. Rashi says, Yibra masal B'med dvarim amurim detzarach shior le'eruv chatzeros o mazon shtei sudos o bein bekulan o kegrogres lekol echad b'tchilas eruv. There has to be enough for everyone in the chatzar to partake from. So how do we know this? B'tchilas eruv, aval b'shiurei eruv afilu kol shehu. Toras eruv mean hatinokos. So there we see that you really don't need that much for eruv chatzeros. You really need more of that for the initial shear, but for the shiurim of eruv chatzeros for subsequent weeks and for subsequent participants of that eruv chatzer, we really don't need a lot, just enough that the children should know what's going on. Rashi immediately to the left, Rashi says, lishkach Toras eruv midoros habayim. So that children don't forget that they're really not supposed to carry. We just have a heter. We have this in our culture. Children don't know that there are places without an eruv. So it's a huge chinuch opportunity. By the way, I want you to know in places not like Chicago, New York, LA, there are plenty of places that you can't carry in on Shabbos. Now we're going to shift over. We're 1/3 of the way down. We're going to go until just about 8 lines or so from the bottom of the page, and then we'll stop. And here, this Gemara is going to be speaking about some of the klalim of psak. How do we know how to paskin when there's a machlokas between certain tanaim? Says the Gemara, Rav Yaakov v'Rav Zrika. They said, Amru, halacha ki Rabbi Akiva mechavero. When Rabbi Akiva's arguing with another Tana, he wins. Ucha Rabbi Yossi mechavero. And when Rabbi Yossi is arguing with a Tana, Rabbi Yossi wins. Ucha Rabbi mechavero. When Rabbi is arguing with a Tana, he wins. Where does this apply? Does it apply across the boards to all different worlds? Every area of halacha? Says the Gemara, depends. Rabasi Amar halacha. This applies to halacha. This is a publicly taught public psak, something that you'd scream from the pulpit as a shul rav. Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar matin. Matin is like, I could find the kula for you, and Rashi highlights this. This is only for you as an individual. You don't teach it. And then Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina Amar nirin. No, just to talk and learning, but not in psak. So the machlokas as to where these rules of who trumps who applies. Kilashon hazeh Amar Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, and he had a little bit of a different language that was a little bit more detailed, because it wasn't just Rabbi Akiva against all people, or Rabbi Yossi against all people, but it was much more detailed. What does Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi say in the name of Rabbi Yochanan? Halfway down, Mem Vav Mem Beis, he says, Rav Meir v'Rav Yehuda, halacha Rabbi Yehuda. When there's a machlokas between Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, we pass on like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Yossi, halacha Rabbi Yossi. So Rabbi Yossi is greater than Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is greater than Rav Meir. Vein Tzarach Lomar, obviously, Rav Meir v'Rav Yossi halacha Rabbi Yossi. That's obvious because Rav Meir lost to Rav Yehuda, and Rav Yossi was greater than Rav Yehuda. So of course, by definition, Rav Yossi we're gonna paskin like him over Rav Meir. Hashta b'makom Rabbi Yehuda leisa b'makom Rav Yossi mibaya. Pasha, that's the case. Amar Ravasi. Ravasi says, Afani lomeid. I also have another learning. I have another set of names that we need to talk about. Rav Yossi v'Rav Shimon halacha ki Rav Yossi. That when you have Rav Yossi arguing against Rav Shimon, we paskin like Rav Yossi. To Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rav Yochanan. Rabbi Abba says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehuda v'Rab Shimon halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda. That when you have Rabbi Yehuda fighting with Rabbi Shimon, we see that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Hashta b'makom Rabbi Yehuda leisa b'makom Rabbi Yossi mibaya. The same argument we gave before. If he's going to lose, if Rabbi Shimon is going to lose the argument by Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi is greater than Rabbi Yehuda, then pashat that Rabbi Yossi is going to be Rabbi Shimon. So says the Gemara, yeah, that's correct. So then Ibaya lahu, 2/3 of the way down, Ibaya lahu Rab Meir v'Rab Shimon mai. What would happen if you had a machlokas Rab Meir Rab Shimon? They're earlier in the food chain. Of course, there are those who are greater in psak than they were. But what about these two? Says Gemara Teku. It's unclear. We don't have a specific tradition on that. That had there been a machlokas between Rab Meir and Rab Shimon, we would not know how to paskin. Amar Rav Misharshia, what are you all talking about? Leis nehu lahani klali. I don't agree with any of this. Rashi highlights Dibra Maskal lahani klali 2 inches down from where we are. Rashi says lahani klali. We don't have these zekalalin on le'el ploni uploni halacha keploni b'chol makom. We don't have these rules. Why? Minna lei the Rav Misharshia. How does he know that we do not have these klalim? So says the Gemara, because ilema mehaditz nan Reb Shimon Omer. This is our Mishnah. If you want to say that it's from our Mishnah, then what does our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah says in the name of Reb Shimon, what was our Mishnah comparable to? The 3 chatzeros hapsuchos zu 3 next to each other, 3 chatzeros 1 next to the other, upsuchos the reshus harabim, and there we said in our Mishnah, irvu shtaim achitzonos im ha'imtzais. If they had an eruv together, then himu teres imahen behein mutaros ima ushtaim achitzonos asuro zu bezu. So that's our Mishnah. We learned this already. And what did Rabbi Chama bar Guria say about that? Rabbi Chama bar Guria amar Rav halacha ki Reb Shimon uman paligale Rabbi Yehuda. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda beat Reb Shimon. That should not be. That should not be. So we see that therefore maybe the rules don't apply to Amras Rabbi Yehuda, Reb Shimon, halacha Rabbi Yehuda. So it doesn't make any sense. How could Reb Shimon win? Elalav shmamina leisnu. So therefore we see the sheets of Reb Misharshia that the rules don't seem to play out the way that you're saying it does. What's the proof? Our Mishnah. We'll stop right here and then we'll pick up tomorrow with another blot and a half. We're right now at the bottom of Mem Vav Mad Beis at the words leisnu. We'll pick up tomorrow from my kushya. Have a beautiful night, everybody.